Alleluia! Christ is risen.
The Lord is risen indeed. Alleluia.
See that indeed, right? It functions grammatically to strengthen the phrase that comes before it. It makes the Lord is risen a stronger kind of statement. But I've been thinking lately that perhaps it serves more than simply a grammatical function. You gotta imagine yourself back in time. It's just beginning to be dawn, and the room is sparse, but the disciples sit around a table, and Peter is staring deeply into his coffee as if it has some sort of answer to give him, and Andrew is lamely spreading butter on his croissant. And then the door flies open. The door flies open, and it's Joanna and it's Mary, and they're coming in, and they're breathless. And Joanna begins to tell this story about taking spices to the tomb, and then the body isn't there, and now they have everybody's attention. Where is his body? Well, says Mary, these two gleaming messengers showed up, and they reminded us of all the things Jesus had said, about how he would die and about how he would rise. And then we remembered that, in fact, he had said all of those things. And so we think, he is risen. But of course, no one says indeed in that moment. Most of the apostles, they think it's an idle tale. I mean, this is one of the truths of life, and one of the worst, that people who die stay dead, and their absence leaves in us a gaping hole and grief, anger, and questions. And so the disciples just think, that is a lovely thought. Thank you. But isn't that a little naive? Isn't that a little bit wishful thinking? And of course, you could point fingers at the disciples, but really, I sit around my kitchen table, coffee in hand, and I read the paper and, missiles in Kyiv and famine in Darfur and gunshots on the east side of town. And then, my phone rings or dings, and it's a text message, and my friend is calling to let me know that the scans are back and it's stage 4. And if that's not enough, you go over and, a lot of us lately have been spending some time over at USCRI, and you run the vacuum and you just think, my goodness, what can we do for folks who have nothing in a system that seems so unchangeable? And if it's not that, maybe it's the bills are piling up or the disillusionment is adding up. And then suddenly it's April 20th, Easter Sunday, and we find ourselves here. And we're grateful for the violins and the viola, but we have to wonder to ourselves a little bit like, well, maybe it is an idle tale. Plenty of dark tombs. It's naive, right? A little bit of wishful thinking. But Peter, he listens to what Mary and Joanna say, and his mind becomes like a Rolodex. He's flipping through the memories. And he remembers that Jesus did say a lot about having to die. Peter, of course, remembers the time he told Jesus that Jesus shouldn't die, and Jesus harshly rebuked him and said, that's not true. The Messiah has to die and then rise again. And Peter remembers times that Jesus said that in gardens and in temples and at table. And he stands up so fast, he bumps the whole coffee table, and it sends coffee spilling in all directions, and he heads out the front door, and he races to the tomb. And he's heaving with breath, maybe because he hasn't been to the gym in a while, or maybe because there isn't a body in there, and it makes him feel sick inside. But he begins to wonder if maybe he misapprehended this whole Messiah thing in the first place. Maybe the Christ is absolutely different than Peter imagined him to be. That God is, in fact, absolutely different than Peter imagines God to be. And Jesus didn't do anything in the kind of traditional messianic mold. He taught, and he fed people, and he healed people, and he believed in making people whole in their bodies and in their minds and in their spirits. God with us, in total solidarity as a human with humans. The Christ who uses his divinity to make people whole reveals the nature of God, this trinity of perfect, loving relationship that spills forth in the Son of God in Jesus. A Christ who dies for love, challenging the status quo and the political and religious infrastructures. A Christ who dies with his arms outstretched to take in the full breadth of creation and all the horrors of history into the very life of God, who dies. But then the Spirit of God comes and turns death itself inside out, and all of those things are undone. And there is liberation for all of creation and all of humanity because God has made it so, for love of creation and humanity. And Peter remembers all the times Jesus said things about who God was and what God was like and how God would use power and what the love of God was like as he walks back to that kitchen table. And he opens the door and everybody looks up. And he looks at Joanna and he looks at Mary and he says, he's not there. Maybe we are looking for the living among the dead. Maybe Christ is risen. And can you see the gleam in Joanna's eye as she says, you know what? The Lord is risen indeed. Maybe he is risen. You know, something of the Spirit has summoned us to this place on this Easter day. We're a lot like Peter, maybe. Like Peter, we want to go and we want to look in the empty tomb and find out where Christ is. And is it an idle tale? And maybe the invitation of the angels and of the women come to us and they say, but remember. And can we flip through our mental Rolodexes? Can we remember the things, the times that God felt near? When was the last time that Jesus felt like a real possibility in your life? That you felt the closeness of the Christ? When did you know in your bones, beyond rational thought, beyond logic, that this was true? And then, see, like Peter, we come back. And maybe one of the greatest functions of the Christ community is to be a place that holds the memory. And maybe when we come back and we're not so sure ourselves, and the best we can say, kind of questioning, tremor in the voices, Christ is risen, then the community can say, yes, the Lord is risen indeed. Because it is difficult work to live this life sometimes. There are plenty of empty and dark, cavernous spaces into which we are asked to stare on a regular basis. And it just seems to defy the odds that God would be risen in the face of such circumstances. And maybe it is that when I can barely whisper Christ is risen, what I really need is the courage of your indeed, Christ is risen. When we stare into the darkness of the news and the newspapers and the violence and the vitriol, indeed, Christ is risen. When grief and sorrow and pain come into our lives, indeed, Christ is risen. When failure seems to be adding up more than success, when our kids seem to be struggling or we're struggling, indeed, Christ is risen. When we're tempted to just give in because we're confused and the heartache is real, indeed, Christ is risen. When our anxiety or our depression catches up with us, indeed, Christ is risen. When the sand shifts under our feet and we're not sure who we are, we're not sure where we belong, indeed, Christ is risen. When I'm not sure what I believe and I'm confused and trust is hard, indeed, Christ is risen. See, the tomb is empty. It's not an idle tale, but looking into the darkness is difficult. And maybe the invitation is that of the women, to be the community that remembers. And when it's difficult for me to remember, you remember on my behalf. And when it's difficult for you, I speak the indeed. But this is what we do for one another. We strengthen one another in the face of the dark tombs of this world, believing in all circumstances that Christ is risen. Let us be that for one another. Let us look into the dark places and find courage in the company of each other. that it is no idle tale. And so, Alleluia, Christ is risen.